Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today's information session on funding available for energy efficiency audits and projects. Our presenter today is Scott Maslansky, Director of Clean Energy Finance for New Hampshire's Community Development Finance Authority. This event is hosted by the New Hampshire Library Association Sustainability Committee. If you're interested in the committee's work or would like to become a member, please send me an email. I'll put my address in the chat. And Scott, I'll turn it over to you when you're ready.
Great, thank you very much. I am going to try to share my screen here, but first, just wanted to thank you for inviting me. It's good to talk with you all. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the work we do at CDFA, as well as specific to energy and the libraries that you're coming here to look into. My name is Scott Maslansky, so I direct our clean energy programming at CDFA. And let me share this screen here and see if this will. And I think you see that right now?
Not yet.
Let's try this. How about that?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try to switch this to. All right. Are you seeing that main page now? Okay. I'll be looking in that direction for the bigger screen. But so the Community Development Finance Authority works in community economic development for all of New Hampshire. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the organization. Some of you might have familiarity. We're sort of a quasi-state organization where there's other authorities in the state: New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, the Business Finance Authority, et cetera. So New Hampshire again is working towards the focus on community and economic development throughout the state, working with a variety of different organizations, towns, businesses. We have grant, loan, and tax credit equity resources that we use, as well as quite a bit of technical assistance we provide, primarily in how to fund and finance projects. And this goes, well beyond energy, though the focus today will be in energy, but happy to talk about those other programs as well. The funding that we have, this is not so important to read all the details on this, but essentially what it tries to express is that we try to support projects from the very idea, the concept initiation, through the planning for the project, the implementation of projects, and even afterward, and have a variety of resources to do that. Again, just going quickly through some of the areas of our funding, critical needs such as, housing throughout the state, economic change, we might be supporting downtown areas and, the arts, businesses in a variety of ways, integrating our various resources through, energy that might include, renewable energy, energy efficiency, other resources that we have to do, repair work in housing or other buildings, community facilities, et cetera. And then, building vibrant communities, sometimes multiple investments in the same community. This is in Keene, so there's nonprofits, for-profits, a co-op food store, theater, art center, entrepreneurship center, soup kitchen, so a variety of areas that we touch. I wanted to jump into the focus today, which is on energy. And, instead, what I have found in these presentations that's most helpful is not to necessarily give you the sort of, fire hose of information about, every detail of funding and financing available, but to really talk about energy in general, and then give you kind of the overview of some of the programs we provide. And then we can, get more into detail on those programs as you have questions as it's pertinent to your particular projects. So some of these I'll zoom through because I pulled from a few different presentations, but I thought it might be useful to kind of do some energy backgrounds briefly too. And so the point of this slide is to just talk about, electricity and fuel use, energy over time and the costs related to that. This is just sort of seeing the general trend. Some of these are old slides, but about electricity, and it trends up over time. The volatility is not huge if you look over a long period of time. It's fairly predictable, up in certain seasons, down in others, and over time, rising. clearly now we're in sort of one of those rising periods for all energy costs. And this shows fossil fuel pricing over time. And again, you can see there's massive volatility here. And this is just to show that from the point of view of many towns and nonprofits and really any entity, that unpredictability can be challenging from a sort of cash flow perspective and a budgeting perspective. And so that's one of the things I like to share is sometimes a move to another fuel, for example, or a move to better efficiency is really a way to reduce that volatility in energy prices. Even if it's a higher efficiency boiler, you're reducing some of that volatility by not having that spike impact you as much, even if you end up sticking with a gas, system or something like that. But a shift to an electric system or even a biomass system, for example, that pricing tends to stay much more consistent over time, even if it is rising, in general. A little bit about New England's electricity sources. So again, a little bit of an older slide, but showing, nuclear and natural gas now being, very significant resources for our electricity production. Renewables on the rise for sure. Natural gas is probably coming down some, but had been a significant, rise from 2000 to 2018. Massive drops in oil and coal, but interestingly enough, in very, recent times, politically speaking, or sometimes as a matter of supply issues, that can change. So right now, oil and coal, I'd say, are probably on the increase, hopefully for a short period of time, but because of a variety of variables. A bit much in this slide, but this is showing our energy efficiency resource standard. Do you have familiarity with that? That's essentially the funding we all have on our electricity bills, whether a residential or a commercial bill, that a small piece goes to this fund that the utilities use for energy efficiency programs. And we had a first period from 2018 to 2020. And because of the importance of efficiency as a cheaper way to reduce our costs than paying for it in other ways, it actually reduced the overall cost to taxpayers in New Hampshire of $570 million, even though we took that money from all of our ratepayers and put it in a pot. But there was a cost savings of $570 million over that period. Recently, over the last few months, it's been a big kind of issue with that program being funded and issues with the Public Utilities Commission. But we're starting to come back to a balance point where we'll be looking at using our 2020 incentives, which was better than it ever had been. We were hoping for a lot more than that, but our programs are kind of back to where they were in a good way. They were going to basically be gone for a while as of like a month ago. The impact, this is, not to get into the details, the load, this is, I think, national, but showing the orange is the gross sort of energy load, annual energy use. If you look at photovoltaics or solar, most solar that we have, it brings down that requirement for energy quite a bit. And I would say even more than was forecasted here in real time that's happening. But the real benefit, the biggest benefit, comes from efficiency, which is this green line. And that shows that's the efficiency plus photovoltaics. But it's just showing the power of efficiency, the importance of efficiency, and then hopefully in conjunction with photovoltaics too. This is a slide just showing, the importance of technology and the impact of drop in cost. So, solar was something only a few people did a while back because the cost was so high. But as with many technologies, including, the cell phone, if you look, I forget there's a name for the associated drop in costs once something sort of hits a threshold of implementation of penetration in sort of the public use. But wind energy, solar, LED lighting have had massive drops in costs, and storage technology, all of these things we will see used more and more, because as you use them, the technology improves, the costs come down, and so they're, you have to assume that that is going to happen at this point because it happens with so many technologies. This is just showing that there's a lot of energy projects in a variety of ways that happen, and these are actually focused on municipal, and state, county, school related projects throughout the state. And this is It's a few years old now, this slide. It also shows all the energy committees in orange-ish color that you see here throughout the state that have a committee of the town that's focused on energy. So where do you fit in? You know, what are some of your most common building concerns, issues? And I'm going to do a series of quick slides now, and I'm going to breeze through these because I want time to talk about the main piece of funding and financing. But you know, some of the common areas when you think about it are related to high energy bills, comfort levels. Definitely people talk about my building is hot over here and cold over here, and some people are cold and some people are warm. Health and safety, is there poor lighting? Is there mold and mildew issues? The durability of the building, is there, you know, issues with moisture that is rotting out the building? Equipment maintenance, is it costing you a fortune just to keep your old boiler going? You know, or your refrigeration system in some places that we talk to, they got it for free, but it's costing them more than it would have bought to get a new one to maintain it. Do you have clean energy or carbon targets for your community, for your, you know, for your library? Is that something of deep interest, that piece of it, to your to the folks that visit? So there's a lot of different kinds of building assessments that can be done to look at energy use. One of them is called a benchmarking study, and I'll show a quick slide on that in a second. Deeper analysis of your bills. How are you paying for energy? What are the costs associated with the energy you receive? And can you sort of suss out some issues? Are you seeing really high electric rates in the winter, you know, or electric use in the winter versus the summer? Can that relate to particular equipment? Some of that can be done through a bill analysis. You can get a walkthrough audit where somebody comes through and just says, oh yeah, you've got barely any insulation upstairs. You know, you need some there. You've got massive gaps that you need to do air sealing. Or a deeper audit where you really end up with a financial model, which I'll speak to in a minute as well, that shows the estimated costs and the estimated savings for doing a particular measure in your building. And I'm happy for someone to stop me if you've got questions along the way, but we can also, you know, questions at the end. This is an example of benchmarking. This happens to be multifamily buildings that were just compared one to the other to show which are the priority buildings. You can compare within a portfolio, or you can compare your library to other libraries in the similar latitude across the country. So you can say, how am I doing? How are we doing compared to the libraries? Or you can say, compared to other buildings in our town, is the library a priority or is it another building? There's different ways to do it. So you're looking at the energy use per square foot. That's how the metric that you're using. And there's a few ways to do that. You can work with an energy consultant. To some extent, you can do it yourself through free software. Very quickly, just because I think these are helpful to take images. I'm sure you all know some of the issues you have in your own buildings, but you want to consider what's the style of your building. Is it brick? Is it complicated? Is it, you know, a stick frame, you know, construction? How do you use your building? This is like a multifamily apartment building, for example, or is it a restaurant, or is it a library? You know, what are the hours of use? What's the current condition? Is there no insulation? Is there some that you can't get to? Is the building too deteriorated to be able to do any insulation? Are there going to be other costs associated to getting to the point to do an energy project? Are you going to spray foam the outside of this building? You know, not a chance. A brick building, probably not if it's historic. Maybe on the inside, you might look at something. So what are those considerations? What can you do in your building? Can you access the space you want to access? Or do you have to find a way in there another way? How does air flow in the building? And this is just a house essentially, but similarly to other buildings, there's something called the stack effect or the chimney effect, which is essentially, you know, warm air rising, typically moving to cold spaces. And as it moves up, it pulls in, you know, cold air from to the basement area. This is called the stack effect. It can be created by wind as well. And so really sealing up all the different places where air escapes or comes in is the weatherization portion of this work. You also have to consider your heating system, your hot water system, you know, the windows to some extent, but you know, those are, unless they're really old and single pane, those are not the best bang for the buck usually. So there's a lot of areas to consider in a building's airflow. And then as far as an auditor is concerned, looking at a building with an auditor eye, you're doing like kind of forensics as you would do like a CSI kind of study, though, you know, hopefully more fun, more light at the end of that tunnel. And you're looking at, you know, how does snow melt on the roof? Using an infrared camera, where are the cold spots or the hot spots? How's the condition of the insulation? You know, are there mice walking all over the place? Are there people walking all over the place? Can you see light? You know, can you see warm air coming right through there? Is there mold and mildew issues in the building? Are there vapor barriers that were, you know, poked through? Is there a dehumidification system that needs to be running 24/7? Are there ice dam issues? So, you know, there's lots to do in a building in addition to the things I mentioned. You know, you're looking at lighting, ventilation, appliances, water reduction, potential for generation on site from solar. And I'm going to skip this one. And the output from an energy audit, a deeper audit, is a financial model. And without getting into details, you're looking at what are you planning to do, installation, what's the cost of doing that, how much are you expected to save per year, how long will that measure last? Installation might last for decades. You know, a heat pump system might last 15 years, lighting might be 10 years, you know, it depends. So you want to know that because you want to figure out what's the payback on your system. But even beyond that, you want to know how much after that payback are you going to get in profit, you know, the sort of icing on the cake there. So it takes this many years to pay back, but that measure is still in place and you're still saving after that. A lot of places don't consider those additional savings, and that's really important to consider. I'm gonna run through this. And then what's missing from those numbers? Some of the things I mentioned before, you don't see those numbers, the maintenance costs sometimes, the importance of comfort, and safety, climate concerns, and then there might be incentives as well. Okay, so here I am. Now we're here, and I don't know. You know, feel free to jump in if you have questions or put in the chat or whatever you want to do. But that's an overview of just the sort of energy need. What's the need here, and how do we kind of look into it? So we have a few programs with CDFA: our energy audit grants, our clean energy financing, and then technical assistance that I can provide along the way, or others. Our primary program I wanted to talk to you about is our energy assessment program, our community facilities energy assessment program. This is USDA funding that comes through CDFA to help cover 75% of the cost of an energy related study. It's up to $6,000 per study. It does depend, it's only for nonprofits and municipalities. We have a separate program for businesses in case you know of any in the community. There are some limitations with median household income and town population. These are have some flexibility, and we've loosened it to some extent recently, but it's not necessarily cut and dry per se. I would say if your town has, you know, lower than $75,000 median household income and a population less than 20,000, then we can probably talk about doing this grant. If it's above that and it's a library, it may not meet the metric, but happy to talk to you about, you know, that or other opportunities. You can be eligible for all kinds of studies, an energy audit or a charrette, which is more like if you're going to do a major, you know, renovation or addition or new construction of some type. Folks have come in for structural analysis for solar. So the solar company says, oh, we don't know if we can do this because the roof may not be able to handle it. You can get a separate engineer to come in and do an analysis to come in and we'll cover 75% of the cost of that. Or energy feasibility, a solar feasibility study or something else, biomass feasibility, et cetera. Any particular questions on this, or we can also save that for the end? Okay, feel free to just jump in. So that's the energy of, you know, those are grants. They're small grants, less than $6,000. There's a few other criteria involved in there, but we've given several of those out. We also have low interest financing. So if your community decides you want to go ahead and do a project, you can come in through our Clean Energy Fund and have financing that's for For municipalities, it's if you can use our federal funding and it's a large enough loan, then it would be in the sort of 2.5% range rate for up to 10 years, potentially more, and it would be 3.5% if you were using our more flexible dollars. So 2.5 to 3.5%, 10 years with some flexibility, and we can support all kinds of solar efficiency projects, etc. Some other funding and financing I wanted to just put out there is connected to our small grants for energy assessments is USDA money for their community facilities direct loan and grant program. And if you're eligible for grants, you could, some towns will only be eligible for loans, some towns won't be eligible at all, and then some towns will be eligible for a variety of grant amounts. And this can be applied to any municipal building that serves the public. And it can range from covering like 15% to 75% of the project costs if you have a really high need community. So those are great, potential, and that can be way beyond just energy. That these grants, the community facilities ones through USDA, could be for, if you're doing a larger, project that has more gut rehab type stuff happening or something, ADA access, something like that. I think it can support those as well. And then of course, New Hampshire saves incentives. Those will depend on which utility you have, what kind of metering you have, what kind of fuel you have. But I know a decent amount about those programs too and can help you with that. These are contacts I just put in the slide deck for you to have for the utilities. I also have a list of energy auditors that work in our programs. You can use other folks as long as they have the right credentials. And I don't have, I can email you that list, Brittany, of those energy auditors, but here's the contacts for the utilities. I just wanted to throw out there a series of towns that have and organizations, not all of them, but some of them that have done studies through our program, our energy audit grants. So they've done it for energy audits, solar feasibility, heating studies, structural analysis, etc. So the next steps really for any of this is to contact me. I'm happy to talk to you about our programs or other programs. Contact the utility, one of those contacts for incentive opportunities. Talk to an energy consultant. Again, I'll get a list over to Brittany. And feel free to apply for our energy assessment grants. It's a pretty easy application. Our online system is, I can walk you through it. It's, if it was on paper, it's really a 1 or 2 page application. It's not a lot, but having your energy use history will be really important and helpful. That process isn't a very heavy lift at all. I'm happy to help you with it. So with that, I think that's the end of the presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
If anyone has questions, please jump in. If there's none initially, Scott, I'd like to just ask, have you seen any particular projects that have been really worthwhile for libraries that you would say, this is a good place to start, or thinking ahead, this might be a goal for the future, if you're interested in doing this type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, so many years ago now, I guess, with the Reinvestment Act funds, there were a lot of free audits that happened. And I think folks, different towns took up on this, sort of free money to do like shelves and shelves full of audits. Some of them went forward to projects, but a lot of them did not. And I think that was because there wasn't sort of enough time put into sort of what's our need and what's our sort of capacity to do a project after that. And so I, just to note, that's not really a specific measure per se, but to say that it does take some time and some effort, and you really have to, think through, are we ready to do a project? And sometimes you can do sort of a lighter audit to say, okay, where's the opportunity in the building? Now we can spend a year, thinking about it. If you do a deep dive and then you wait, more than a couple of years, you're starting to lose that pricing and technology changes and things like that. So it's important that you engage at a level where you're thinking about it from the audit through, implementation. Town meeting, is that required, and when does that happen? What's the timing of grants and such? So those are important steps to think about. A lot of libraries that you see around are, historic buildings and of one sort or another, and some are easier to treat than others with upgrades. So, you have to have sort of a reality check on what can get done and what's your highest need. If you're a library that's only open 2 days a week for 4 hours at a time, the payback is going to be challenging. And you really want to look at what are the lowest sort of cost things that you can do to make it realistic. You also want to think about what systems are you going to need to spend some money on anyway. Is your boiler, are you past the useful life of your boiler and it's just hanging on, and you're thinking of doing some weatherization? You're going to want to do those at the same time, or at least think about them at the same time. Because if someone comes to size a new boiler or change you to air source heat pumps, and you haven't done your weatherization, you're going to size it too big for your building when you finally do your weatherization. And then you've wasted money on the upfront cost, and you're wasting money, because it's not going to be the most efficient it can be if it's oversized. So, when you're doing anything to do with the building envelope or the HVAC system, you want to think about that whole picture. If you're doing lighting separately, then that can be done on its own. If you're thinking about, well, we'd love to do solar one day, we have an oil boiler, we're thinking about air source heat pumps. You want to think about pairing those air source heat pumps, because it's electric, with solar, because you're going to get the best benefit from doing both of those at the same time. So it really depends where you are. If you're already hooked into natural gas, switching away from that has traditionally, been challenging if you wanted to, only because you've got you've invested in the system. Prices are high enough now that it might be a consideration if you really have good reason. For example, you may not have cooling in your space, and now you can get an air source heat pump that can do heating and cooling. And maybe you keep that older fossil fuel system just as backup for the coldest days. And if you're in northern New Hampshire, while the air source heat pumps can technically go down pretty low now, -13 or even deeper. I believe some of them say, you have to think about, it's not housing, so it's not the end of the world if you have a couple of days where you put in a space heater, if you needed to for the winter. If it was housing, I would say you'd really want to have a backup system if you're up in the north. In the southern part of the state, you might be able to get away with only air source heat pumps. So does that help?
That's great. I'd love to hear other questions that anyone else has while we have Scott.
I have a question about the heat pumps. On your slide that said had the paybacks, the heat pumps were in the negative number.
Yep.
Is that if you're using traditional, so we have solar panels, and we are changing over, one of our furnaces died and we're going to change it over to a heat pump. Would that be in the positive numbers because we're providing the electricity with solar?
Yeah, I usually use that slide as an example of, that was one example where you might choose to go to heat pumps for a different reason than just the cost savings. So you might still be having significant energy savings. And that slide was actually also made, before this spike in, fossil fuel pricing. So that might even flip. That particular project might look different today than it did, a couple of months ago. But in general, electricity, can be a higher cost per unit of energy, but you're getting it much more efficient with the heat pump. Plus, you're getting the cooling. So it really depends on the situation. If you have solar and you're switching from a fossil fuel system, I would say, yeah, there's a really good chance that you're, in the positive there now. And it can go that way. It depends on a lot of things. Some spaces, are just, depends on the fuel you're going from, the efficiency of the system that you have, and it depends on what you're doing with the heat pumps. They can have a fairly expensive upfront cost, but you're getting some cost penalty, but you're getting significant efficiency. So you might, especially like in the shoulder seasons, in the spring and the fall, where you might have had to use a very inefficient system for all the time during those seasons. Now the air source heat pump can do it all at much more efficiency, especially in those seasons. So it really depends on the project, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah, okay. But it helps a lot on that metric.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mary, you have a
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, though you froze for a second there.
My internet's really bad today.
You might want to turn your video.
Yeah, my internet is terrible today. I will. Okay,
Yeah, better.
is that better?
It is.
Sorry, I don't. Yeah, usually we have pretty good internet. So I'm in Tamworth, so we definitely need real heat. And so we have an air conditioning system that was put in when we put a rather large addition on back around 2000 that's aging out that we need to replace. The building also has the original building is from 1895, and then there's an addition done in the 80s, and then this large addition done in 2000. So the air conditioning does do the whole building, the whole upper level. And I'm just wondering what kind of, would it be worth getting an audit to find out about heat pump? If whether that's applicable to our situation. We got an interesting building. We got a nice, had an energy audit a few years ago, not that long ago, and had quite a bit of insulation installed.
Oh, good.
Especially in the attic of the oldest part of the building, which of course you can imagine what that was like. So we're well insulated. The newer sections have insulation. We've got 4 furnaces, 3 are in the attic, 1's in the basement. It'd be great to switch away from the propane too. So just to get away from the fossil fuels, because the expense of that is just keeps creeping upward.
Yeah, and is the insulation in the attic on the floor of the attic?
It's on the floor of the attic. Yep. And there's, you have to see it to believe it. There's a room in the attic that actually has spray foam insulation all around it, and all the furnaces are in.
Okay. That was a good move. Yeah. And the duct work is pretty well insulated.
Yeah. And
yes.
wondering if that works for air conditioning.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say, so the one benefit of the heat pumps is that, right, if there's an opportunity to shut down some or all of those heating systems in the shoulder seasons and use them for heat, use the heat pump for heat, and then get cooling in the summer, then yes, that's, there's could be some good opportunity there. It kind of depends. It sounds like you're better off than many heating and cooling systems in the attic that basically are heating and cooling the attic as much as the rest of the spaces. And so you might want to assess the cost versus benefit there. And through our program, if you wanted to, you could probably look at have a more specific study if the building envelope isn't that in need, because you've already done some of that work. So it could just be sort of like a heating system study, if you're eligible for the program, and that's fine to do as well.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? And I don't know if there's, there might be solar related questions as well. In which case, solar can have some challenges for a municipality or nonprofit, just because you don't get all of the benefits a business would from the tax credits. There are options there, such as power purchase agreements, where you don't own the system. There's no upfront cost, so it's easier at town meeting. You get some incentive off of your bill. It's how you negotiate it with the company that does it. And you get to have solar, which might be part of your desire as well there. But you wouldn't actually own the system at the beginning. You could potentially buy it out after a 6-year period for a sort of market rate at that point, market cost at that point. So a lot of municipalities have done that, and nonprofits. It's not the ideal. If you could own it, that'd be great. But that cost can be, if you don't get those benefits of the tax credit, can be challenging. I'm happy to talk to you more about that as well.
Scott, 2 questions. You mentioned the different audit, or the different companies that provide the audits.
Yeah.
If someone receives a grant, would the library be selecting which company to work with, or would you sort of pair them?
Now, usually I provide a list of the 3 firms that we've ended up working with in the state that do a lot of, commercial building audits. It's a variety. There's like one firm is a one-person show, one firm is, several people, and then another one is like, has national presence. So it's quite a variety. And so it kind of depends on your need. If you have a very complex situation that needs a lot of engineering, then you might go with one firm. Depends. They travel all around the state, all of them. I provide that, and then you would usually call, 1 or 2 of them. Try not to get everybody calling off 3, because it makes it tough to be in business if you're doing estimates all day long, and it will drive their cost up ultimately. So yeah, and you're happy to. They've used this program multiple times. If you find somebody else, you're also welcome to bring them to my attention.
Great. And if anyone has any questions about how to sort of call up these folks and ask some questions of them, or if they have questions about this program, can they just go ahead and contact you?
Yeah, no problem. And this information that was in the slide deck is there. I can provided it from my email signature as well. You can grab that and send it to folks anytime. Contact us. Be happy to talk with you about opportunities for the library, or if you speak to an energy committee in your town about other buildings, happy to discuss that as well. And again, not just our resources, but I can point you to some of the other resources and contacts out there.
Great. Did anyone else have any other questions, Mary?
I just have a quick question. If there's so if there was some kind of audit going to happen, is it helpful to have that sort of more holistic town-wide look if the town have a contract for solar, a solar array on a former transfer station or dump actually, or something like that? Would it help to have sort of all those people involved in the the review of what you're looking at?
Yeah, so it's one of those, it depends answers, because it depends on sort of the personality of your community and how folks work together. If it's hard to get something done and you are able to make more decisions for your library, some of these projects can be tough to get done unless you kind of got to push through. So, you might choose to focus on your space. Ideally, sure, there'd be more input from other entities prioritizing buildings. Again, if your library is only open a couple of days, but you got a town hall that's open every day and, has a high energy use, that's where you start to look at, what are the bills looking like? If you've got a wastewater treatment plant in your town, that's going to be the place to go to first, because that's going to be super high use, but a lot of towns don't have that. And, it might be a public works building that uses a lot of equipment. So if you've got limited funds in the town to invest in something, or limited capacity for debt, to do a project each year, then you might want to look at sort of a little bit of prioritization of what should be audited first. You can also do that sort of benchmarking analysis, which can either compare similar buildings kind of across the country, or all the buildings in your portfolio, to sort of say what's the highest energy use intensity. And again, you might have a really small space with really high energy use intensity, but you might decide, oh, but it's in the end, it's not that much cost compared to a better energy use intensity where there's opportunity, but overall it just happens to be a much bigger space with more people in it, so it has more cost. There's a kind of information that help you make those decisions. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. And I will say towns are choosing from the solar perspective. I've seen some towns do just every department kind of does their own array, either next to the building or on the building. Some towns are trying to do more community solar type arrays, or shared solar, where they basically use one piece of land for a significant array in a small town, and then all of the municipal buildings utilize that energy. And there's pluses and minuses to each. A lot depends kind of on the policies and the way the rate, the net metering is structured. So the way you're compensated for energy you produce that you can't use in the moment on site, or even during the year on site. So, you know, it kind of depends where you are in the state.
Any other questions? Or if anyone has a project in mind that they would like to run by or share?
Yeah, feel free to jump in, and also feel free to let Brittany know too, or me know, if you felt like the other, you know, I've done a lot of presentations and I'm always tweaking them to try to, you know, be more pertinent to what your interests are. If the slides about energy in general and about kind of the need and the market out there, if those are helpful, or if you just wanted to get to the point and focus on the funding and financing, that's always helpful information for me. So I'd love that. Any of that feedback would be great.
Is there any funding out there for electric car charging stations?
Yeah, good question. I should have jumped in on that. So there is, the state has the Volkswagen mitigation funds that came from the Volkswagen fiasco, and they've sort of partitioned that funding into a variety of areas, from charging stations to support for, you know, potential electric buses to, you know, there's some sort of fleet charging versus, you know, sort of passenger charging along major corridors. Right now, I think the RFP had just come out, so there's one for charging stations along major corridors. There's more money for charging, and I don't know how they'll allocate it yet. And that might be able to go to other entities just looking to do charging stations. In the RFP that had come out, though, that's already, you know, past the date of response, they were covering 100% of the cost for charging stations if you were on a main corridor, you know, one of the main corridors in the state. So, and for a business, it was covering 80% of the cost for charging. For these are high-speed charging, the superchargers. Yeah.
So when you say along a major corridor, how far from that major corridor?
They gave a distance, but I think it was, you know what, I'm forgetting. It was, they had to be within 50 miles of each other, so they couldn't be closer than that to get the funding, or an existing, you know, fast charger. But I forget the distance from the corridor. It would have to be relatively close, though, for people kind of on the highway.
Okay.
But that money has already, you know, that application's already done, but there might be others that come out. And then there's a whole slate of federal funding that's been allocated for charging, but that, you know, I don't know how it's going to play out yet. I assume it's coming through, it might come through DOT. I'm not positive. Sometimes DES, sometimes DOT, sometimes now Department of Energy.
Okay, I'll keep my eyes open. Thank you.
Sure. And I place to go for that, sorry, excuse me, one is Clean Energy New Hampshire's website. They will probably have good links to that, or the New Hampshire Department of Energy. Might be a little more challenging to find on there, but if you want to learn about the Volkswagen funds, you can go through the Department of Energy. Feel free to reach out to me too, and I can send some links.
All right, great. Thanks.
Scott, on that same topic, and please correct me if I get this wrong, but I believe that the state was requiring that you have a certain level of power going to your property to support the level 2 charging. Is that correct?
Well, yes, you're right. You would be responsible as an entity, you know, applying to for the supply side of that to pay for transformer changes, or, you know, anything related to getting though at some point they changed part of that, but I think it was getting the power to the site, and then there's a certain point at which they would pay for. It's been a little while since I read the RFP, yeah, but yeah, so for potential cost there, yeah.
So I'm wondering, is there anything in thinking about energy audits and upgrades, if a library is really thinking, you know, we'd love to have a car charging station in the future, will that come up in the energy audits in terms of having that certain amount of supply of energy that can be produced for those charging stations, or would that be a sort of separate conversation?
I would say there's not super strong expertise within the auditing community because they haven't really had to deal with it on charging. They could recommend others to bring in a lot of cases, like similar to solar, well, probably even more so than solar, but in solar, you know, when you get an audit, an auditor can give you sort of an overview. They use an online tool to give you kind of a broad brush solar assessment and how much you could generate and, you know, get you some rough costing. You're going to be much better off getting a solar provider to come in and give you an estimate. And so, you know, because they're going to really give you more detail. Same thing with charging, you know, they're going to know the costs better. And as costs, you know, are changing literally daily, some of the just wiring, you know, costs and, you know, actual for physical wires changing a lot, you know, all of that changes so quick that the auditor won't be as up to speed with that. So some of these things, you know, you're going to want to go out to a contractor anyway to get to sort of look at or relook at the costing info. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
It did.
There's one other point I wanted to make too, is just, yeah, a real awareness that when you're talking to an auditor, you make sure they understand the hours of use of your facility and your heating system and how many people are in the building, and then also what you're going, are you making changes to the building, and do you want to put in a charging station? So at least they can kind of understand what, you know, you're looking to do that might change the energy use, especially if you want to do solar or something like that, because that will deeply impact that.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Any other questions before we end the event? No? Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you so much, Scott, for sharing the information. This has been great.
Okay, yeah, good. All right, thank you, everyone. Take care.